and welcome to today's Osmine Mets Tech Talk. I'm Sheldon Varco, Manager of International Projects here at Osmine, and I'm pleased to be your host for the session today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we're hosting this webinar from the lands of the Gadigal people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending this webinar. Next slide, please. Today's webinar will look at the emerging solutions helping to create safer operations and environments for the mining workforce. This webinar is the second tech talk focusing on social value within our ongoing ESG webinar series. Our latest session looked at creating community value, and you can find a copy of that recording and register for further webinars on our website. Next slide, please. For the webinar today, we have 4 fantastic tech talks from MyPass Global, Ethos Health, Creative Pipeline, and Coda Wireless. Our speakers today will look at innovations in areas such as software and systems utilized to simplify and standardize workforce information, fatigue risk management and implementation of strategies to prevent fatigue-related incidences, the role of virtual reality in improving workforce safety and training, and reducing instances of interactions between people, machinery, and infrastructure for underground mines. Following the tech talks today, you'll have the opportunity for audience Q&A. You can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send your questions over at any time. You can also upvote on the questions that you most want answered. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Matt Smith, the CEO of MyPass Global, for our first presentation. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Sheldon. Thanks for having me. So look, in this presentation, my goal is to expand your thinking around a new way of managing safety critical data in the field and to safeguard your workforce. So hopefully you'll walk away energized by a new model that industry's adopting today that's really allowing data sharing and collaboration to mean that more people are coming home from work unharmed. Next slide, thanks. So look, the reality of it is it's very challenging to track and maintain visibility over skills and competency data. And this is particularly the case for contractors. So as a lot of you will be aware, contractors are often less familiar with projects, with the site itself, with equipment and your procedures. And contractors often receive less training and communications compared to in-house staff. And that not feeling part of the team can also cause contractors to feel less confident to speak out about safety concerns or dangers. And this is exacerbated when there's a change of duties on site. And one example that one of our mining clients shared with us was when there were 2 crews working on a site. One of those crews was doing some hot work involving a 400-degree lance to knock off some lugs there. And one of the members of that crew doing that hot work had to leave and go home early. And one of the contractors from the other crew came across to lend a helping hand. And unfortunately, that worker who came across to help whilst they were a qualified welder had not been trained properly in hot work and was on top of a step ladder with a 400-degree lance melting off these lugs, and unfortunately slipped off that ladder. And that 400-degree lance actually went and brushed the chest of that individual, and as he fell to the ground, and he was very lucky that it didn't land perpendicular to his body and actually cut him in half. And there was a long recovery period for that individual, and when that root cause was done of that safety incident, one of the root causes there was the change of duties that happened on site. The supervisor in charge of those 2 scopes of work couldn't check in real time whether that individual had the proper training and just took it at face value that this guy was helping because he was competent and had done it. So that inability to have that live data in the field was one of those big use cases, and that spawned that particular company to embark on a big change program to improve that. And these factors I've just mentioned earlier obviously all increase the risk of serious safety incidents on site. And so the question really is, how do we get here with all the best intent that we have to keep people safe, yet we're still having gaps out there in the field? Next slide, thanks. And so when you look at the traditional approach that industry's been using, really Excel spreadsheets are dominating. All this compliance data silos within some clunky systems, standalone software or ERP systems. So there's been a lot of reactive processes where it's I guess, on the back foot in terms of trying to get access to the right information that is required for people to access site and to do their tasks. A lot of that training and competency data hasn't been verified or hasn't been verified to the right standard. And there's a lot of manual updates and data duplication happening as well. And what that leads to is higher operating costs, increased compliance risk and errors, and also potential legal action or reputational risk there as well. So the question really is, how do we better manage safety critical workforce data and allow all of industry to simplify, standardize, and share? Next slide, thanks. And so here's the model that we've come up with to really have more of a, I guess, worker-centric approach. So at the center of the ecosystem that we've built is a MyPass skills passport. And that individual, through a permission structure, can connect with one or more training organizations, contracting companies, asset owners or operators, and also with industry bodies as well. And what that really creates for the industry is a single system of record, a single source of truth for that individual, with verified data that goes with them as they move throughout the industry. And what that means is that safety critical data can be made, again, with that individual's permission, accessible anywhere. And so really, what's that about? It's about improving workforce compliance, the onboarding process, but also downstream matching that to other systems that need to ingest that data. Next slide, thanks. And so in terms of the organization's perspective on that, what does it look like for them? It's really about giving real-time dashboards and visibility of who's trained and competent on site at any given time, and real-time access in the field there too, through QR codes and other means to connect with that data. All the data stored in the system is private in terms of compliant with the privacy legislation and the permission structures we've got in place. And what it ultimately does is reduces the risk of non-compliance out there in the field, whilst also making sure that we catch some of the fraudulent training documentation that creeps through in the industry. And what that all boils down to is really giving organizations that assurance that the right people are doing the right work at the right time, and you know it. And that know it versus trusted is a big kind of paradigm shift to where the industry has traditionally operated. Next slide, thanks. And another key piece here is creating a more connected worker. So it's using that workforce information that's been validated for many purposes beyond just compliance. So leveraging that skills passport to feed downstream systems and giving visibility of that worker across the whole life cycle. And that can be cross asset for an organization or cross industry for those that are operating across multiple industries. And so you can see in this wheel here, we've highlighted the core areas where MyPass operates in terms of onboarding and offboarding and competency and performance tracking. But there's lots of downstream systems that rely upon that data for, say, the management and execution of work, people movement, demand preparation, for things like site access, invoicing, wearables, a whole range of great systems out there. But ultimately, you need to know who you're dealing with some level of assurance and what their training is in order for those systems to be effective. Next slide, thanks. And I'll just finish up here on a case study here too, which I think is a really good example of how we can take this model to the next level and where industry is really starting to collaborate. So this is a case study from the VeriSafe program, where the founding members are Woodside, Shell, Chevron, Alcoa, BHP, and Rio. And what they've done here is remove the duplication and waste that's been happening in the verification of competency process in WA. And it was identified that multiple companies were essentially repeating the same VOCs on their workforce and duplicating all that effort and not getting any consistency across the industry. So what we have now is one trusted, verified VOC for workers that are doing high-risk work, and that can be shared across any of those founding members or anyone who signs up to that program in the industry. And so this is a real game changer, as it sets the scene for industry to continue to simplify, standardize, and share, and not just for VOCs, but for any other training or attainments right through to medicals and common safety inductions. Next slide, thanks. And so, look, I'm really excited about the positive change that's here now in the mining sector, and we realize, you know, MyPass's purpose of empowering safe, agile, and connected communities using validated safety data, and the role that can play to really support business partners. And this has come from a new way of managing safety critical data in order to safeguard workforces. And so really, I'm hoping that you feel energized by this new model that the industry's adopted, and to ensure data sharing and collaboration transform safety performance and ultimately bring home more people safely. So if you'd like to discuss this further, then please reach out to me and I'll be more than happy to connect you to one of our team. Thank you. Back to you, Sheldon.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, Matt. A great innovation there in safety systems, and also quite a stark example there you've provided at the start about why this is so important. So thanks a lot for that. I see a question coming through for Matt. So yes, if you do have any questions for any of our panelists today, please pop those through the Q&A box. On to our next presentation. So I'd like to introduce Trent Watson, who's the CEO and Principal Fatigue Consultant at Ethos Health. And he's going to be talking about automating workplace fatigue risk management. Thanks, Trent.
Yeah, thanks, Sheldon. So yeah, I'm talking about fatigue tech today, which has been an innovation that we've been working on for a number of years, and its primary purpose is to automate workplace fatigue risk management. I might go to the next slide. Thanks, Hayley. This has come about principally, I suppose, there's three common problems that we come across when undertaking fatigue risk assessments across the industry. One is just implementing workplace fatigue mitigation strategy. So, when this question is asked, does the workforce implement the procedures as they're specified? Often we're getting a response, well, I don't really know. And then other responses saying, well, no, I can't be confident that they're actually implementing the procedure as specified. And do you have the ability to measure or demonstrate compliance with your workplace fatigue procedures? So, and often if any situation were to occur where a fatigue incident or fatigue related incident were to occur, and these types of questions were being asked, we couldn't respond, or those businesses couldn't respond in the affirmative and understand, what their workforce were doing in response to fatigue risk management. The second problem often cited is that managing personal risk factors, that the workplace can't control what workers do when they're not at work or in between shifts. So then often the question is, how can we actually engage and support workers to help them better manage personal fatigue risk factors? And what can we do with a person who's had multiple fatigue events, and particularly those that are at higher risk of fatigue? So, they're often those that are working night shift, those that are working extended hours, those that are doing boring, monotonous tasks as well. And if you start layering those up against someone's capacity, it only takes a small personal factor to actually reduce their capacity, and then a fatigue-related incident may occur. The third piece is that you're just training workforce to competency standards in relation to fatigue risk factors. So how can you actually streamline this? And that's what we've tried to culminate in the Fatigue Tech platform. So next slide, please. So the solution, we just wanted to find an easy way to implement, monitor and manage workplace fatigue risk. So it basically, we're looking to integrate three functions in one secure system and just make it easy to meet those health and safety obligations and support workers with the necessary knowledge, skills, resources to manage fatigue risk. So there's three sections to Fatigue Tech, and one is the Fatigue Tech personal aspect. It's just to support people manage their personal risk factors. The workplace, Fatigue Tech workplace, just to implement the fatigue procedure, and then Fatigue Tech training to streamline the training needs of the workforce. So next slide, please. So I thought it's probably best to provide a bit of a schematic of these three different sections. So the first one I'll focus on is just on the far left. How do you actually support and engage the workforce? One of the things that we've provided, so you can distribute, booklets or leaflets and posters and various other things that often will get lost or not looked at. So we've actually put these all in one secure platform, which we call our Knowledge Centre. There's a range of different themes around just introductory themes that high-risk work groups want to understand in relation to fatigue with the introduction section, but then other themes around sleep, nutrition, mental health and physical activity on how they can manage them best to manage the risks of fatigue. Often though, people, and if we don't answer all the questions within these themes, we've got a frequently asked questions or an ask an expert section. So if you see the secondary section there, the support. So if the questions aren't answered by these people, well, aren't answered for the people, they can ask an expert and we get back to them with within a 24-hour period, and they are then posted on a FAQ section, so everyone then gets access, and then that continues to build out this resource for anyone with access to the system. Often that's not enough for some people. They want, look, I'm aware that information is there, but how can I actually screen what my risk factors are? So in the support section there's some online personal risk assessments embedded in the platform as well. And one of the critical risk factors at a lot of sites is just journey management. So it's not only the fatigue risk at work, but then journeying to and from home or at the end of a series of shifts. So we've got an online journey management plan system, which I'll talk to a little bit further there in the support section. Now, escalating beyond that, there may be people that have had fatigue events, and we do have an online or virtual and professional consultation, and people can get referred to specialist fatigue subject matter experts to undertake further review. The second section there is the workplace risk management, and this is our Fatigue Tech app. There's 4 functions here, and it's all about implementing the fatigue risk management system on site. We've got a work time function there. So often work sites will have a time and attendance system, but often what we've come across is those time and attendance systems don't embed the full sequence of work hour guidelines or standards. So the workplaces don't actually understand whether anyone is breaching their work hour standards or guidelines in real time. So we, with the businesses that we're working with, we get an API from their time and attendance system, comes into the app, and it will trigger any breach or warning to the individual and to their supervisor. And depending upon the procedure, it may trigger them to do a fatigue check, which is a point in time fatigue check to indicate you're working at high risk. You require additional controls to continue to work in this high risk environment, and then it gives an opportunity for that individual to then specify what controls they'll put in place to actually manage that. So that might be additional breaks, it might be working with colleagues or a buddying system under greater supervision. It might be they're executing non-safety critical tasks during that extended period. Or it's just a requirement for a handover, there's additional travel, etc. So they can document that. So all of a sudden now fatigue's not just a problem, people are actually documenting solutions. And then if anyone was to come in and ask the question, how does your workforce manage fatigue? They can actually answer this objectively and down to indicating this for this work group, these are the top 10 strategies they use in this situation. We've also got a start fit application in there, and that's just a requirement. If someone, for an example, as a use case, they come in on overtime, you could request that they do a start fit just to ensure that they're well prepared to undertake that additional shift. Or if you've got a high intensity roster, you might require people to undertake a start fit before they commence that. And then the journey management plan is also embedded in the app. So it can trigger, if anyone is working night shift, they're high risk or extended hours, it can be triggered for them to complete a journey management plan just because they've been identified as high risk. So all this culminates in a monitoring and compliance dashboard that can be reported through to a supervisor, the supervisor kiosk. So the supervisor kiosk has an at-a-glance traffic light guided system to identify anybody at high risk, but then this all rolls up to a company dashboard so they can see the compliance with their working hour arrangements and also compliance with the requirement to complete fatigue risk assessments as well. The third component on the right is our training centre. So what we've tried to do over the course of 20 odd years, we've generate a lot of content for large organisations to put on their own LMS, and often, so we've always provided the ingredients. We've never actually baked the cake though. And we're often thinking, geez, we wish they'd narrate them and make it interactive and apply video, etc. So we've actually now produced a series of training modules for fatigue awareness, for supervisor. We can create bespoke fatigue procedure training, onboarding with fatigue tech, our journey management training, and one of the other things in the pipeline there at request of some clients is a family-oriented thing for shift workers as well. So next slide, please. So the fatigue tech app, the workplace app, is all about implementing that and monitoring the fatigue risk management system. It provides those best practice assessment communication tools for workers and their leaders to follow a systematic process to implement the organisation's fatigue risk management system. Provides a tool for organisation leaders and workforces to fulfil their duty of care and just the real-time data collection. So we can continue to design, adapt and enhance the fatigue management practices and solutions in the workplace. And that's on Google in the App Store and on a progressive web app as well on a Windows interface. So next slide, please. Supporting workers, this step care model we certainly use. So we can actually help manage just people at low risk just with our self-help resources. The people that are at risk of fatigue, so that's the competency-based training piece. If there's people within the work group that have identified risk, they've had a fatigue event from an in-cab camera as an example, they could be referred through to do a personal risk assessment and be guided to self-help information, or they could self-identify. And then people at high risk, so these are probably the people that have been identified of having had a fatigue event. They undertake a personal fatigue assessment, and this can be combined with specialist consultation with the fatigue specialist. And then if they're then identified with severe or complex situation, we can have some wraparound multidisciplinary care and referral through care coordination, and that might be a GP, specialist psychologist, or any other allied health professional. Next slide, please. Streamlining fatigue training. This is all on our LMS. It can be linked into specific corporate LMSs as well. But as I've already discussed, it covers modules and interactive and competency-based training in fatigue awareness, supervisor, journey management training, and bespoke procedural training when requested. Next slide. And what it also does is all this wraps up into automating monitoring compliance with workplace procedures. So you can see on the left-hand side there just the compliance with their work hour standards, how many breaches or warnings are out, where those breaches in what specific work hour guidelines, and we can also break this down to employee role. So if we see that some roles are breaching, it could be a workforce shortage, so we can follow up in terms of, responding to that. The one on the left there is just an example of our electronic journey management, and then, so basically it can identify not only geographically where people are travelling, but who's not in line with the work hour requirement, the journey management requirements of the business. Next slide. And that's my presentation complete. So I'll hand back over to you, Sheldon.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, Trent. And it's a great comprehensive system there for prevention of incidences through fatigue. So thanks a lot for that. Moving on now, I would like to introduce Tim Black, who's the Managing Director of Creative Pipeline. And he'll take a look at how virtual reality is helping to save mining lives. Thanks, Tim.
Great, thanks Sheldon. Okay, so I'm going to quickly cover how training in virtual reality is improving health and safety in mining. For those who don't know who Creative Pipeline are, we are based in Newcastle and have been around for over 20 years, providing solutions for training and marketing for the mining, health and renewables industries. Our specialty is taking complex information and turning it into easy to understand and very useful resources. The three examples I'll take you through are a chemical pump process for Orica, a dangerous procedure for Bradken, and an underground hazard ID module for Orica. All of these VR examples use experiential learning methods to improve training outcomes in the mining industry. Okay, so this is the Orica pump operations and site tour / induction. This is one of our earliest VR training projects and was part of a collection of 5 VR modules covering all sorts of topics. These modules were embedded into an existing 5-day face-to-face induction course for people wanting to work as a shop fire assistant on a mine site. The VR was mostly run on the second day of this course. I was lucky enough to be invited to the delivery of the VR sessions at Singleton Bowling Club on the Tuesday. And I helped the Orica training team assist the trainees through the VR modules through that day. As shown here, the trainees needed to learn how to operate the pump that pushes ammonium nitrate solution A&E from a holding tank on the right in the shot, through the pipes and the pump system and into the tanks on a truck known as an MMU on the left of the shot. Next slide, please. As the trainees work through the VR training, the system and equipment work exactly as they would experience working on site. All the signage and safety stickers are there, even padlocks on certain bits of the equipment. A byproduct of this VR project was that we also built the whole Orica compound that the pump is located in. The Orica training staff worked out that they could do a full site walk around and induction using this VR digital twin. They could even do the site tour over a video call when the COVID pandemic lockdown hit, allowing them to continue their training through those times. The trainees need to learn how to set up the pump and make it work properly. Then they have to turn it all off again. Then they have to problem solve 5 emergency scenarios. All of this is tested and a report delivered at the end of their training. So the Tuesday went well. All trainees passed the VR component of the course. On day 3, which is the Wednesday, the same trainees were loaded onto a minibus and taken to the Mount Thorley coal mine outside of Singleton for a site visit at the real Orica compound. This is identical to what they saw in VR the day before. Next slide, please. The comments made by participants were that the VR training had fully prepared them for what they were going to see on site the next day. Every single trainee walked up to the real pumping equipment and knew what to do. They all passed their on-site real-world competency on the real equipment without any issues at all. This training is now being rolled out through Australia and is a great example of VR being used as a proper tool for work. Next slide, please. This is the Bradken ground engagement tool GET training. Okay, so this project shows the trainee the procedure to change a shovel tooth on a huge mining shovel. These teeth are very heavy and require special tools to swap them out safely, as well as a crane to lift the parts on and off during the process. Next slide, please. This VR solution has step-by-step training with labels and voice guidance to teach them what to do. The trainee is then tested with no assistance to ensure they have understood the process, with reporting of how they have gone at the end. Next slide. Like the pump ops example, all equipment and tools in this VR module work as they do in real life. As they use the tools, parts are animated to disengage as they would in reality. The heavy parts are also given weight in VR through the way they are animated to reinforce that these need to be handled carefully and only by the crane and lifting tools. This helps the trainee to respect the weight of these dangerous parts. Next slide. There is a focus on tool placement, as this assists the trainee to remove the parts easily when they encounter the real thing when out on site. They get to understand not only the process, but the individual tools, what they are and how they work. This VR app has been rolled out to 4 countries so far, including Australia. A great byproduct of this project is that the Bradken marketing team are now using the same VR application at trade shows on their exhibition stands globally. Next slide, please. Okay, lastly, this is the Orica Underground Hazard ID training app. This VR project was designed to show the trainee the most photorealistic representation of what it is like to work underground. This is the main menu that is a full-scale down 3D model of an actual underground mine. Next slide. The VR underground environment was built through tight collaboration with CP and Orica personnel to ensure not just accuracy, but also to capture the older operators' vast knowledge and put this into the VR application so that others can learn from their incredible experience. This included visuals and the sounds of being underground to enhance the simulation. Next slide. The main outcome of the training was initially to provide hazard identification through these underground mining environments. Next slide. But what we found was that once the trainee puts on the VR headset, they have an emotional response as it is exactly the same as being underground. Next slide. A byproduct of this project was that we found that the facilitator can observe the trainee's emotional reaction to the underground VR environment. This allows the VR module to also be used as an early recruitment tool. So non-suitable people can be weeded out early in the selection process if they react badly. Next slide. At the end of the VR module, the trainee needs to work their way through an emergency scenario where there is a fire in the underground area where they are working. They have to calmly get back to the refuge chamber they saw earlier. The emotional response to this is quite incredible. When you finally get to the refuge chamber and close the door behind you to the safety of that, there is a real emotional relief, one that will not be forgotten anytime soon by the trainees. Next slide. Okay, that was a very quick summary of these projects and some of their outcomes. Happy to discuss any of the above projects and how these were produced and implemented into training systems, or any other of the solutions that we provide for the mining industry. Thanks, Sheldon.
That's terrific. Thanks a lot for that, Tim. It's great to see how VR is being utilised quite broadly now within the mining industry, and some excellent applications there, working with another OSMINE member in Orica. So that's fantastic. Plenty of questions coming through, but if you have any more questions for Tim, please just use the Q&A box down the bottom. Now on to our final presentation before we get to the Q&A. So I'd like to welcome Stéphane Tournu, Product Manager, Coda Wireless, who will be looking at technologies for reducing interactions within the underground mining environment. Thanks, Stéphane.
Thank you, Sheldon. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity you are giving us to introduce what we do here at Coda Wireless. You mentioned, I'm Stéphane Tournu, and I'm Project Manager here at Coda, and we're based here in the headquarters in Adelaide. Next slide, please. So our background and original commitment at Coda Wireless, and where you find our biggest achievements, are to be seen within the smart vehicles and smart city fields. And today, our software solution is embedded in several 100,000 of production vehicles. First with Cadillac, and more recently on the latest Volkswagen Golf 8 and the upcoming VW electric platform as well. So it's definitely a growing sector. Next slide, please. Coda Wireless is recognized as a world leader in radio frequency location and communication technologies, and we use that expertise to support V2X communication. So for those who are not familiar with what V2X is, it actually stands for vehicle to everything, and it includes V2V, vehicle to vehicle, V2P, vehicle to person, and V2I, vehicle to infrastructures, all these connecting all those. So in a nutshell, you take this busy intersection you have here and you connect all the elements I just mentioned, vehicle, personal, and infrastructure. And you've actually created what the industry calls a cooperative intelligent transport system, which means you're able to support everybody working and living safely together, which is a huge challenge for the mining industry. Next slide, please. So this is the first layer, the simplest layer of our system architecture in mining. And our equipment includes, for personnel, we equip people with an individual tag that they can be actually integrated into cap lamp or belt tag. So it's very small form factor. It's not anything additional to be carried. It's embedded in their normal equipment. Vehicles on their side, they are equipped with what we call onboard unit, our XPUV here, and it makes them both detectable and detecting, and it allows to process the ranging information that is then displayed on an HMI to inform them about what's in the surrounding. Next slide, please. So underground mining, which is by essence a GNSS denied environment, it presents an even bigger challenge in determining absolute or relative position between people and vehicles. Our system utilizes proven DSRC communication device that not only maintain communication links between objects, but also conduct time of flight measurements between them. And this proximity detection is really the first layer of our solution, as it allows you to start building a collision avoidance system out of that ranging information you are getting. Now, the interesting thing about the SRC in underground mining is its ability, or the ability of the signal to bounce on surfaces, either side walls or ceiling, and which with the right algorithm literally gives the ability to see around corner. And to be a bit more specific and factual, we can move on to next slide. Thank you. So the interest of what we call non-line of sight vision is that we see is what we see here on this slide. It's actually quite dark on my screen. The whole point of the non-line of sight is the reaction time, which is being enabled, and we have two examples listed here. Personnel are usually detected at least 60 meters away from the vehicle, and this is what you are meant to see on the bottom right picture. So if we take a vehicle which is traveling at 25 kilometers per hour, which is probably on the high end in underground mining, the operator gets the notice about 8 seconds before a potential collision. So even taking out reaction time, there's still plenty of room for him to take corrective action. And the same mechanism apply for V2V, except that the vehicle are detected even further away around corner as well. One of our focus is, of course, to deliver in accordance with MR's guidances, and to be again more specific, level 7 awareness, level 8 warnings, and level 9 interaction, where we, for instance, can actually bring a vehicle to a stop or just prevent it from moving because someone is in the vicinity, like sleeping in a loaded bucket, for instance, as we've seen. We can move on to the next one. So we have just seen our solution in a very decentralized way, on a peer-to-peer way, and I mentioned this was the first layer. We do have the possibility to make a step closer to a smart city type of setup, deploying communication and ranging infrastructures. And of course, it doesn't suit every type of mining technique, but the benefits are huge. It's really unleashes centralized reporting of live vehicle and personal location, in-vehicle traffic management advice, such as virtual traffic lights, speed limit, all the road rules you may want to install to have smooth traffic. Comprehensive incident analysis as well. As you deploy infrastructure, heat map are much easier to achieve, and you can identify accident or incident prone area and may address or may rearrange the areas or the traffic rules, and potentially as well production tracking and centralized coordination. So the possible that this infrastructure opens are quite wide. To the next slide, please. This solution with infrastructures and all the potential benefits that we are already seeing is actually the journey we are on with Rio Tinto in Mongolia. And Oyu Tolgoi is one of the largest gold and copper known deposits in the world. And it's also Rio Tinto flagship in terms of underground safety technology. So it's quite interesting for us to be there. We started working with Rio on other sites as early as 2016, and project at OT really started in 2019. So what we do there, we provide central positioning services for the underground operation, which includes 2,000 cap lamps that we've recently upgraded, over 100 vehicles, and all this monitored by 150 roadside units. So it's actually a strong driver for Rio, this ultimate goal of traffic management, and all the technology we have deployed already, and since actually a couple of years, is really allowing this step up to traffic management and real-time traffic, and potentially as well optimizing production, ventilation, and all those aspects that have to be managed on a mine site. Just to conclude, I would say it's quite easy to focus on the technology aspect, but obviously our motivation, and I'm probably speaking for all the panelists today, is fueled by the incident report we all receive too often from mine sites all over the world. And the intention from Russell, Kenneth at Rio, and our determination is very clear around safety of the underground operation. Coda OLS already has a strong record, strong achievements, and we have a very clear roadmap as well ahead of us. So feel free to reach out to us if you want to discuss furthermore. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, Stefan. And that's a great message there to end on with your presentation at the end. Now, we do have just a couple of minutes left for audience Q&A, so I will ask the panel to keep their responses brief. Stefan, I'll come back to you because there's a couple of questions here that have come through during your presentation. So the first is, what is the maximum range for V2V and V2P?
With maximum range, we're actually seeing much further away than we would want to use, because that's becomes quite a lot of information we don't want to provide to the operator. But we see up to over 500 meters for V2P actually in line of sight, over 600, 700, 800 meters in line of sight for V2V as well. So it's a very long vision as a peer-to-peer solution. Obviously, as you deploy infrastructure, you are able to capture everybody's position across the whole mine site, so you know exactly there's no limit then. But yeah, peer-to-peer is at least 500 for V2P, and yes, over 800 for vehicle to vehicle.
Excellent. And coming back to you, Stefan, there's another question here about how is the backbone infrastructure deployed in the mine? Is it cable-based?
It is cable-based. It's using Wi-Fi 802.11p to discuss between vehicles or personnel and the infrastructure. But yeah, infrastructure is cable-based, yes. And this is why I was saying may not apply to every mining technique, because some are very mobile or some are very distant that can't be covered. But we may also install infrastructure in some specific areas that we want to monitor, because we know they are busier than others, workshops or this type of, or around where personnel is working. So it doesn't have to be across the whole mine site. It can be in selected areas just because that's where the need is.
Excellent. Thanks, Stefan. And I do see there's responses to most of the other questions through that Q&A, but I might just, before we wrap up, just welcome Matt. Matt Smith. There's a question here about what benefits do you see Industry 4.0 predominantly having for mining safety? Matt, if you could just elaborate on that, because your response there is quite good.
Yeah, okay, no, happy to. So yeah, as I've sort of mentioned there, I think it's bringing together data and the hardware that needs that data to operate harmoniously. So it's all about the interconnectivity of that information in order to achieve outcomes. So the example I've given there is, take for example, the validated information that might sit in a worker's skills passport, which is available out there in the field. And it could be things like, as I gave the example there, that someone's had their hazardous areas training. So if they're connected to a GPS tracker or similar, or even a physical gate access system, that information can be interrogated in real time and mean that individual doesn't go into harm's way or in an area where they don't have particular training. So that's just one example, but there's many more in terms of connecting people to machinery as well. So before you jump on that forklift, for example, to make sure that you've got a valid forklift license or high-risk license that hasn't expired and so forth. So it's all about connecting the data and the hardware and all those good things that are coming down the line as part of Industry 4.0 in order to make sure that you're getting the best of both worlds.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, Matt. And that is all the time that we have for today. We are a couple of minutes over time. As mentioned there's some answers in writing there from our panelists on those questions. And if you do want to get in touch with any of our panelists, please just follow up. I'll just go to the next slide just before we go. So our next webinar in this ESG series is on the 28th of September, and that will look at effective supply chain management. Obviously a big issue that we've seen recently with the COVID-19 pandemic, but also oil and also inflation seen around the world. So a very important webinar there to tune into. We have 4 great companies presenting: Datamine, SAP, Ionix, and ION. So we look forward to welcoming you there. Some of the topics we'll be looking at is enabling ESG, transparency and accountability, increasing ease of engagements for suppliers, and also monitoring projects across the value chain. So we hope you can join us for that one. Thanks to everyone who's attended this session. Big thank you to our panelists, some excellent presentations today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks everyone, stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.